Committee, we're going to open up the hearing for House Bill 2498, prohibiting the Secretary of KDHE from requiring COVID vaccination for children attending school. First up, we have proponents, Representative Brett Fairchild. Welcome to committee, and there will be a 3-minute limit on everyone. We'll hear all the proponents, and then we'll take questions. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity to come before your committee today and testify in favor of HB 2498. I introduced this bill several weeks ago, and the bill was co-sponsored by 8 representatives. Those representatives were Representative Burris, Representative Garber, Representative Howe, Representative Jacobs, Representative Lee, Representative Murphy, Representative Proctor, and Representative Riley. This is a very simple and straightforward bill. It would simply prevent the Secretary of the KDHE from mandating the COVID vaccine in public schools or in child care facilities. It's very limited in scope. It wouldn't ban the COVID vaccine in public schools or in child care facilities. And the bill would also not prevent the legislature from mandating the vaccine in public schools if they chose to do so. It also would not prohibit local governments from mandating the COVID vaccine if they chose to do so. It's very limited in the scope so that it wouldn't be a controversial bill, because I wanted to actually have a chance to have it go somewhere for it to be successful. And so I think it is a bill that would have a lot of support in the House if it were to pass this committee. I would say the concept of this bill is actually somewhat similar to the constitutional amendment that we just passed in the House, HCR 5014. The goal of that constitutional amendment was to basically provide a check and balance on unelected bureaucracies in our state. And I would basically argue that this bill has the same goal of trying to place limits and checks on the administrative state, on unelected bureaucracies. You know, the legislature is the politically accountable branch of government. We're accountable to the people of our district. If the people of our district don't like what we're doing and don't like how we vote, then they can vote us out of office. And obviously the same is not true of an unelected bureaucrat. If people don't like what the Secretary of the KDHE is doing, they don't have there's nothing they can do about it. They can't vote him out of office. And so basically, I think this bill is necessary in order to give power back to the people, so that the people can handle this issue through their elected representatives. And I would just say that this bill has nothing to do with opposing any vaccines, including the COVID vaccine. This is not an anti-vaccine or anti-vax bill in any way. All it is doing is it's simply taking away power from an unelected bureaucracy, giving power back to the people through their elected representatives to handle this issue. We've seen a lot of support for this bill. I think somewhere around 40 written testimonies. Since there's so much support for this bill, I would like to ask for a recorded roll call vote on this bill. I know that's up to the will of the committee and up to you, Madam Chair, but that is just what I would like to request. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative, thank you. Next, I have Laureen Schiffman, private citizen. Welcome to committee, Laureen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members, for having me. My name is Lauren Schiffman. I'm a mother of 2 young boys in Lenexa, Kansas, and my job is to research and make sound medical decisions for my children. It is absolutely terrifying to know that one unelected person has the ability to add any vaccine at any time to the childhood vaccine schedule. There's no checks and balances for anyone who is duly elected in this state, and this is wrong. This was serious concern before with the other vaccines, but it's absolutely terrifying when we're talking about a non-FDA approved experimental gene therapy injection that was rushed to market and has never been used before. I'm sure you're all aware that it usually takes 10 years at minimum to bring a vaccine to market. They endure animal trials, long-term safety studies, but none of this was done with the COVID injection. For 5 to 11-year-olds, only 1,000 children were part of the trial that actually received the vaccine. 1,000, that's it. That's not enough to generate a safety signal. I want to compare this to the first rotavirus vaccine that was actually brought to market in the 80s. It's common childhood vaccine. It went through long-term safety studies and was fully FDA approved. They saw issues in the trial, but they were deemed insignificant. But after they launched, that same signal came back, a similar signal that we're seeing in these COVID-19 vaccines. But the huge difference with the rotavirus vaccine is that it was stopped. It was stopped just after 83 children got a condition called intussusception, and that was removed from the market, and it affected 1 in 5,000 children. The problem with the COVID injections is the trial was too small, as we discussed, to even see a safety signal. Just like the physician said at the ACIP convention that authorized the EUA, we need to put it out there to actually see what happens. Well, we know what's happening. It's myocarditis. We've had at least 34,000 cases reported to VAERS with myocarditis. The licensing bodies have admitted that this is underreported. We have 1 in 3,000 children, that's mountains above the rotavirus vaccine, yet it still remains on the market. So I don't know about you, but I don't want to play those odds with my 2 young boys. I don't want to run the risk of permanent heart damage. Parents should not be forced to have to give their kids an injection that has a black box warning on it. Lastly, I ask that you make an amendment to add the bipartisan supported language passed in the special session, ensuring
Lauren,
that schools...
I need you to wrap.
Okay, yeah, all right. Shall grant the sincerely held religious beliefs and not be questioned, just as you all passed bipartisan supported in the special session. So if you could please add that amendment, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, I have Sean Held. Did I pronounce that correct? Heald. I should have known better. I am so bad on names, so I apologize. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. To even consider the possibility of mandating something as potentially catastrophic as these ineffective, unsafe, unnecessary, but liability-free and very profitable new vaccines defies belief. Such arbitrary power must be checked before it's used. We have too many examples of the fallibility of the individual with one-size-fits-all healthcare approaches, and far too much evidence to support my opening sentence, however absurd it may sound. Some people really do want to mandate this. The matter should have been put to rest by the FDA Advisory Council when the testimonies were overwhelmingly opposed to giving COVID vaccines to children because of the disproportionate risk to benefit ratio. Children and teenagers are at very little risk of complications from COVID, unlike the vaccines. The media is currently working overtime to convince us that healthy children having strokes, heart attacks, and blood clots is either normal or being caused solely by COVID. The spike protein has been proven not to stay in the vaccine injection site as was originally claimed. Adverse event injury and death reports for every reporting system on the planet are the highest on record by far. Adverse event injury and death reports, and those are severely underreported. VAERS deaths went from an average of 150 a year to 22,000 in 2021. The vaccines don't prevent catching or spreading COVID. There is no argument that vaccinating children protects others. It would be unethical to risk their health for the benefit of high-risk individuals, even if they did give that protection. There's also some evidence to suggest that vaccination is driving the variants. While I morally and intellectually object to subjecting children to the significant risks for short-lived protection against a disease that poses almost no threat to them, I couldn't ask for legislation to bar parents from doing so, being against my libertarian nature. I bristle at the mention of mandating such risks to be taken by everyone who uses a public service that we are all forced to pay through taxation. I hope that many people would remove their children from public schooling if such a mandate was ever handed down by an out-of-control health secretary. But some would be coerced into taking unwanted risks and could very well end up injured or dead as a result. This bill would protect them from this particular vaccine, though it appears to leave the door open for further emergency use vaccinations. The risk of a healthy child dying of COVID is virtually nil, and those with comorbidities remain at liberty to take whatever precautionary measures they see fit. While I support the religious exemption for the other vaccines, I would like an amendment to guarantee acceptance of any exemption request without subjecting the parents or child to questioning. That power could be arbitrarily abused by officials who may act emotionally on this politically charged topic. Our children deserve the same protection as afforded the rest of us by the broad religious protections of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, as well as HB 2001 signed into law in November. The language from SB 398 could be used. The First Amendment to the Constitution is very clear on religious freedom, and we should not be subjected to interrogation about our sincerely held religious beliefs. Frankly, these are very personal beliefs and are none of anyone's business. I have many credible references in my written testimony to support these statements. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much. Next, I have Connie Newcomb, and I believe she's coming in virtual. Is that correct, Connie?
I have to unmute myself. There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Madam Chair and the Health and Human Services Committee, my name is Connie Newcomb, and I am representing myself. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on this very simple bill. I support this bill, and here's why. The KDHE is an independent agency of the unelected with virtually no oversight by the elected. The people of Kansas have zero representation with the KDHE. The KDHE is an appendage to the CDC and other national agencies who have oversight over health decisions which affect millions of people all over the world. We live in Kansas, and any oversight needed should be adjusted to fit Kansas. It should not be a rubber stamp of upper agency advisements. Furthermore, this vaccine is a medical procedure. Long-term results are unknown, and when you are talking about children, this is of ultimate importance, since they have a long life, hopefully, ahead of them. A medical procedure cannot be mandated by one's personal physician who knows the patient. How can the KDHE or any elected or unelected official prescribe for every single person? They can't. And this medical procedure, while it involves risk, has zero accountability, zero. In the litigious world we live in, this should be of great concern, but everyone seems to give these bedfellows a pass, as if they are a charity that is always altruistic, benevolent, and magnanimously pure in motives. Children do not generally die from COVID, but over 23,000 people have died from this vaccine. The uptick of death of children has been dramatic, for example, in France, in just the short time that it's been out. Why would we allow this to be a mandated to children? Children should never be the victims of a medical experiment for any reason, including that of protecting the lives of their elders or someone else. That is a form of sacrifice that children should not be required to bear. The KDHE is demonstrating its callous disregard for truth every time it sends out a TV ad that proclaims these vaccines are safe. These ads never mention any scientific proof because it cannot be proven to be safe for everyone, and they aren't. Every other drug has paragraphs of contraindications to look for, but with this injected drug, they blatantly declare it safe with no disclaimers. Mandated vaccines are understood by the general public to be something that they need to do, so they go in and get their shot. Much of the public does not do their due diligence in research. They are not aware of religious or medical exemptions. And mandating this vaccine preys upon the ignorance of the parents finally realize it. If they do, it is too late. They must live with the suffering and consequences, and no one knows if the consequences will be now or 20 years. We don't know if, we don't know what, we don't know when, but we do know full informed consent does not exist, and it cannot exist. This is still under emergency use. There is no emergency except that of children being put at risk for myocarditis, passing out, and a host of other possibilities, including death.
Connie, your 3 minutes is up. Can you wrap up?
Okay. Yes, I can. I have one sentence. Please be preemptive and stop this train before it leaves the station. Vote yes on HB 2298. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I have William, is it Mize? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Thank you.
All right, welcome to committee.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and the committee. My name is William Mize. I live in Lewisburg, practice law in Overland Park, and I'm here in support of HB 2498. This bill has one purpose, and that's to take the KDHE out of mandating COVID-19 vaccines for children. It has nothing to do with the other vaccines, the other 70 vaccines that are, or doses that are already mandated for children. It does not limit the KDHE from mandating any other vaccines. It only limits this vaccine by the KDHE, and we simply think that that is too much power for a regulatory agency. The question really is who decides on this COVID vaccine for the children. It's clear that children are extremely limited in the suffering that they're going to experience from COVID-19. It's also clear that this COVID-19 vaccine has not been tested like any normal vaccine, as we've heard before. Usually it'll take 10 years before you approve a vaccine. That's not been the case here, and I don't think this is something we can experiment with on our children. We can't rely on the industry. They are making huge profits, but more important, they don't have any liability. We've given them a free rein without liability. If something happens, they're off the hook, and we'll just have to handle it. We can't rely upon just the politicians or the political appointees because they've been shown the virus may be a health issue, but this has been shown to be a political issue, and we can't rely on the normal situation, I think, with the agency. I think it's interesting if you look at the definition of vaccination, how it's changed. The technology of this vaccine of the COVID-19 is the mRNA technology. That's a new technology. The definition of vaccination previously, before 2021, was the act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce an immunity to a specific disease. The new definition by the CDC as of 2021 is the act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce a protection to a specific disease. They've had to change the definition of vaccination just for this COVID-19. And I ask you, do you want to take a vaccination that they had to redefine what a vaccine is and experiment on the children after you've had maybe a year to experiment with this? I think not. So we would urge you to put this in the place where it should be. For this vaccine, we think the legislator is the one who has to decide. You have the political responsibility. We do not think it should be left up to the CDC, the FDA, and certainly not the KDHE. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. That was the only ones I had listed for in-person testimony today as proponents. Committee, you will notice that in your packet online is that you have several pieces of proponent written testimony only. Now we'll step over to our opponents, and I have Sarah Ersick-Good, board member, Immunize Kansas Coalition. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Madam Chair and members of the committee, on behalf of IKC, our testimony is provided today in opposition of House Bill 2498. So IKC is a group of Kansas providers, health department officials, researchers, and educators working together to improve the health outcomes of Kansans through improving vaccination rates across Kansas. So let me first start by saying that IKC does not currently promote, recommend, nor are we working to ensure that COVID vaccination is added to the list of school-required wellness vaccines. That's not our role. We provide this testimony today in order to protect the integrity of the current process. The bill before you today is being proposed as necessary to protect our students from an impending COVID vaccine requirement, but my guess is that's not what it's really about. It's opening the door to start to question and challenge that process. And I would encourage you to stay true to the process as it stands. So this attempt to change the process is something that's been working its way through the legislature in some version for the last 2 legislative sessions. And if you will look back to the first proponent testimony where he talked about the purpose of this bill, it really is about pomp and circumstance. It doesn't really prohibit the vaccine. It's only affecting one decision maker at one level. It doesn't actually, he made the comment that it doesn't stop local authorities or other authorities from requiring the vaccine. And so it really is about grandstanding today. There were a couple things that they talked about in some of the proponent testimony that I really wanted to just take a moment and refute. So most of my testimony that I provided to you in written, I'm going to let you read, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that I think are misinformation. So one of them is the proponent made the comment about ensuring that there is a protection of religious exemption and religious beliefs. So the current legislation that allows for the requirements for wellness vaccines actually provides already for religious exemptions. So that's something that is provided in the status quo and not a reason to change or amend the current process. One of the things that they mentioned was that the vaccines are not safe. So there is millions of people across the country who have received the COVID vaccine, which proves that it is safe. I sent you some information just by email that provided quite a bit of information about vaccine myths and things that are untrue, that also provide some evidence about the COVID vaccine. But one of the other things, or the last speaker just talked about, is there's no liability for this vaccine. And so currently, in current process current practice, right now the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program is set up to allow that anyone who receives a vaccine and is injured or has a unintended consequence or side effect, that allows them to file a petition to be compensated or to be covered under the Vaccine Injury Protection Program. And so the COVID vaccine is one that is also covered under that injury program. So it is covered just like every other vaccine that is required. So a review my written testimony. KDHE has the clinical expertise to make those decisions, and they've gotten it right. In the last 41 years of the statute being in place to require wellness vaccines for schools, they've only made changes to that 3 times. It's not something that they do. COVID vaccine's not something that they're intending to change.
Sarah?
Yes.
That's your 3 minutes.
I'm sorry, I missed the stop. I thought it still said 30 seconds. So thank you. I refer you to my testimony, and I'll stand for any questions if you have them.
He holds that up for a long time.
I just missed the change.
You're fine. No, you're fine. Kelly Summers, State Director, Kansas State Nurses Association. Welcome to committee, Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee, for the opportunity to be here today. I'm a little, I always come a little bit unprepared for my verbal testimony because I always seem to need to change it a little bit, so I apologize. But on behalf of registered nurses, I have to say the last couple years during COVID has been the hardest that our profession has ever had to go through. And it always makes me teary, and I'm sorry, but when we're looking at vaccinations, I really am baffled at the lack of trust that we have put in nurses right now when it comes to vaccines. We never want to put our children at risk. We are there to save children. We are there to provide our children the best care possible. We are not there to hurt children. I understand. I'm a nurse, but I'm also a female, and I am a mother. And I understand taking your child in to get a vaccine is difficult. I don't want my child to be in pain. I surely didn't want him being poked with a needle and hearing him cry. But at the same time, I knew that the health of my child was so important and I was well educated enough that I knew I was making the right decision on behalf of my child. And I wasn't influenced by people who don't have my child's best interest at heart, that don't have another political agenda, instead of caring for our children right now. And changing any process. I know we're talking about COVID, but I honestly don't believe that's what's happening with this bill. I honestly think what we're trying to do is change childhood vaccines to make it all choice. There are exemptions that are in place. They have been there for decades, but so have our nurses who have been there for decades taking care of our children. Additionally, because I always think it's very important to not only talk about other populations, but I'm going to talk about pregnant women. Because if a pregnant woman isn't vaccinated or a pregnant woman is exposed to a certain disease, she puts her fetus at risk of either miscarriage, severe disability, and I'm sorry, 30 seconds, Representative Epley. So I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned this further, and I appreciate all of your support for RNs this year. It's been tough. I know a lot of you have been there for us, so thank you so much, and I'll stand for questions when necessary. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, I have Heather Braum, Health Policy Advisors, Kansas Action for Children. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Chairwoman Landwehr and members of the committee, my name is Heather Braum, and I am the Health Policy Advisor with Kansas Action for Children. I want to highlight 2 items from my written testimony and then end with a reminder from the not-too-distant past. First, any childhood vaccine that is approved and added to the required vaccination list has been available for many years before it is ever made a requirement in Kansas. We're not even a year into this vaccine this bill addresses being available to most school-age children. Second, the vaccine this bill references isn't even available yet for one of the populations this bill covers, and its efficacy has yet to be demonstrated for children under the age of 5. Worrying about a requirement in Kansas is putting the cart before the horse. But our biggest concern with House Bill 2498, contrary to what proponents said, is that the required childhood vaccinations list for childcare and school attendance is placed into jeopardy. That list includes vaccinations against polio, diphtheria, and measles, among others. That risk to the current process that already works well is why we're here today. These vaccines protect children's health and the community's health and the health of immunocompromised people. They keep parents in jobs and stop vaccine-preventable disease outbreaks from overwhelming our healthcare system and hurting our communities. I am the daughter of a retired small-town Kansas funeral director, and Dad also manages his town cemetery. I've walked through that cemetery numerous times, and I've noticed something. In the older sections of the cemetery, prior to 1950 to 1960, there are so many infant and child graves throughout, many without names or dates listed. If there are dates listed, they are for far too short a number of years. The newer sections of the cemetery don't have these graves. Why? Childhood vaccines. House Bill 2498 is a dangerous solution in search of a problem. For the sake of Kansas children and their health, please vote no on this bill. Thank you, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next, I have Reverend Lois Harder, Associate Pastor, Alexandrol Mennonite Church.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome.
I am Lois Harder, as she mentioned, and I'm here today representing not my congregation, but rather Kansas Interfaith Action. This is a statewide multi-faith advocacy organization that represents primarily mainline Protestant, Jewish, and Muslim communities and individuals on important public policy issues. I'm speaking today in opposition to House Bill 2498. Although we do acknowledge the controversy around COVID vaccination mandates, Kansas Interfaith Action and the denominations and communities of faith that make it up have taken a supportive position on vaccines, including COVID vaccines. We do consider it a matter of saving human life, as we are instructed in Deuteronomy 30, verse 19, which says, "I have set life and death, blessing and curse before you. Now choose life, so that you and your descendants will live." We oppose this legislation on that basis. In addition, as has already been mentioned, we are also concerned that this bill will become the first in a slippery slope of rescinding all childhood immunization requirements. Kansas Interfaith Action and its supporters want to say this as clearly as possible. We are implacably opposed to the rescinding of childhood vaccination requirements. We consider that these are gifts of God through smart and dedicated people, that they have saved millions of lives and prevented countless cases of measles, mumps, rubella, polio, etc. I realize that this is not what this bill proposes, but we are concerned that this bill would be the first step down that path. We think that this bill is unnecessary because the KDHE has not required COVID vaccinations, and there's no indication that it wants to or plans to, as has already been testified. Many of our younger students aren't even eligible for vaccinations. But we oppose this bill because we support childhood immunizations in general, and we don't want to see Kansas start down this path of rescinding the requirement for them. Thank you for this time, and I will also stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much. And that was the end of the in-person opponents that I showed on my list. Committee, you will find a group of written-only testimony as well. I have one neutral, which is Ashley Goss, Secretary of Public Health, KDHE.
Good afternoon,
Welcome.
committee. Hi, thank you. And correction, I'm the Deputy Secretary of Public Health. I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. So my testimony is very short and sweet, and you guys have it in front of you. Just please know that KDHE had no plans and has no plans to make this a required vaccination for school-age children, the COVID-19 vaccine. And that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Representative Epley said you did exceed your time limit, just so you know that. That's why we like you coming before us. Okay, committee, that ends the conferees that we have on House Bill 2498. What's the committee's desire? Representative Barker.
At this time, I have no motion. I'll leave it to the Vice Chair.
Okay, Representative Epley.
Madam Chair, I would like to move that we suspend the rules and go ahead and work this bill today.
Without objection? Representative Barker.
I have just a couple of comments. One, as many of you know, I'm kind of slow and methodical, and I've read the bill. I've heard the testimony. If we suspend the rule and work the bill today, I may have an amendment, and I can't do that. You know, we only use that on things of non-controversial nature, where we have a lot of proponents and no opponents. Here we're kind of equally divided. So I'm going to oppose the motion of the Vice Chair. It'll take 2/3 to override me. But, you know, there's another day. As we all joke, nothing dies at the Kansas legislature. And I know Madam Chair and I were very active in the Overreach Committee. In fact, the bill that was passed 2001 had her name on it, had my name first, though, because I'm a B. But, and we created the religious exceptions and the medical exceptions during the special session. But we took a number of days to develop that. So I'm going to oppose the motion of suspending the rule and working the bill immediately. There's another day we can come back and do that, possibly. But so, Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me to make a few comments.
Okay. Is there a second to Representative Epley? Seconded by Representative Blex. We're moving on to work the bill today. Representative Barker.
You've got to vote to suspend the rule.
Is that right, Scott?
We have a 24-hour rule from the time we hear a bill to the time we work a bill.
Call a vote on Barker's amendment. Is there a second?
I have no amendment. I thought he made a motion to suspend the rule and work the bill. And that's my comment, that it'll take 2/3 to suspend the rule and work the bill. I'm in opposition of that motion. I just want us to take more time. So I would encourage my colleagues, if you don't want to hurry, then vote no on this motion.
Well, and if we don't if we don't work it today, then it's done
Well,
for the session, because it's not an exempt bill.
There are mechanisms that, as you well know, that can have that come back. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it is the last day, and I agree. So I'll stand on my comments.
Further comments? All those in favor of suspending the rules, raise your right hand. All those opposed? The noes appear to have it. The noes do have it. The rule will not be suspended. We are completed with the hearing on this today. Committee, we will adjourn until 5 o'clock tonight in this very room unless there's a committee in front of us, and then we will have to wait.